I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into Grandma Rose's kitchen and found my 3 cousins huddled around her worn recipe box, whispering like conspirators. They froze when they saw me, guilt flashing across their faces before Diane, the oldest, quickly slid the box behind a flour canister. "Julia, we didn't expect you until tomorrow," Diane said, her voice a pitch higher than normal. Next to her, my cousins Mark and Tricia suddenly found intense interest in the floral pattern of Grandma's tablecloth. "I finished up work early and thought I'd help get things ready for the memorial," I said, setting down my bag. The familiar scent of Grandma Rose's kitchen, cinnamon, vanilla, and that indefinable something that made this place feel like home, wrapped around me, momentarily softening the sharp edge of grief. It had been just 2 weeks since we lost her, and being back in her kitchen made my heart ache. None of my cousins moved to hug me, which was strange. We weren't the closest family, but we'd always been civil, especially in times of loss. The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut with one of Grandma's cherished bread knives. "Well, we've got everything handled," Mark finally said, standing up straighter. At 38, he was the youngest of my cousins, but the most business-minded. "Actually, we were just discussing some family matters." "About Grandma's recipes?" I asked, nodding toward the partially hidden recipe box. The 3 of them exchanged glances, the kind that confirmed they'd been talking about me before I arrived. Tricia, always the peacemaker, sighed. "We might as well tell her. She's going to find out anyway." Diane nodded, reluctantly. "Fine. Julia, we've decided to publish Grandma Rose's recipes as a cookbook. We're already in talks with a small publishing house." The news hit me like a slap. Grandma Rose's recipes weren't just family keepsakes. They were pieces of our history, precious heirlooms that she had specifically entrusted to me during the last years of her life. I had spent countless weekends in this very kitchen, measuring flour with her arthritic hands guiding mine, writing down the little details that never made it into her handwritten recipe cards. The exact way to fold the dough for her famous rugula, the precise moment to pull her lemon bars from the oven. "You're publishing her recipes?" "All of them." My voice remained calm, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "It's what Grandma would have wanted," Tricia said, not quite meeting my eyes. "For her legacy to live on." Mark crossed his arms. "It's a solid business opportunity. These old family recipes are gold in today's market. Authentic, nostalgic home cooking. We're thinking of calling it Rose's Kitchen, Treasured Family Recipes." I noticed how they kept saying we. Not once had they mentioned including me. "And when were you planning to tell me about this?" I asked, my hand resting on the counter, where I'd spent hours helping Grandma prepare holiday meals while my cousins were too busy to visit. "Well," Diane shifted uncomfortably. "We know how precious you were about the recipes, how you always acted like Grandma gave them specially to you. We figured you'd try to block it or demand special treatment." "Special treatment," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "You know what she means," Mark cut in. "You always thought you were Grandma's favorite, always hanging around her kitchen, acting like you had some special connection to her recipes." "I did have a special connection," I said quietly. "I was the only one who showed interest in learning from her, the only one who visited regularly these past 5 years." "Here we go," Diane rolled her eyes. "Saint Julia, the perfect granddaughter." "That's not fair," I said, feeling the familiar hurt their dismissal always caused. I never claimed to be perfect. I just loved spending time with her. And yes, she did specifically entrust her recipes to me. She told me so. "Well, she didn't put that in her will, did she?" Mark challenged. "The recipe box was in her kitchen, which belongs to all of us equally until the estate is settled. These recipes are family property." I took a deep breath. I could tell them now. Tell them that Grandma had done more than just verbally entrust her culinary legacy to me. But something in their smug expressions held me back. They had deliberately excluded me, had gone behind my back. The hurt of that betrayal stung too sharply. "So you're moving forward with this without me?" I asked, wanting absolute clarity. Trisha at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We did consider including you, Julia, but we need to move quickly, and you're so particular about the recipes, always insisting they be made exactly the way Grandma taught you." "Heaven forbid someone follow the actual recipes," I muttered. "See, that's exactly the attitude we wanted to avoid," Diane said. "Besides, you have your hands full with that little bakery of yours. How's that going, by the way? Still barely breaking even?" The jab was deliberate, aimed at my modest bakery in downtown Millfield. I'd opened Sweet Rose Bakery 3 years ago, naming it after Grandma. It was small but developing a loyal following, though my cousins had always viewed it as a cute hobby rather than a real business. "The bakery is doing just fine, thank you," I replied evenly. "And those recipes you're so eager to publish? They're the backbone of my daily specials menu." "Well, they won't be special anymore once our cookbook comes out," Mark said with a self-satisfied smile. "We're thinking of a spring release, capitalizing on Mother's Day marketing. The calculated timing, using Grandma's recipes for a Mother's Day cash grab just months after her passing, made my stomach turn. But I kept my expression neutral, not giving them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply their betrayal cut. "I see," I said. "And the proceeds from this cookbook?" "Will be split 3 ways, of course," Diane answered promptly. "We're the ones doing all the work, taking all the risk." 3 ways, I repeated, not 4. Mark shrugged. "Like I said, you weren't interested in being a team player." I hadn't even been given the chance. They'd made assumptions, excluded me deliberately, and now were acting like I was the difficult one. It was a familiar dynamic, one that had played out countless times in our family. Grandma Rose had been my ally, the one who saw how they marginalized me. Without her, I stood alone against their united front. "Well," I said, picking up my bag, "I wish you'd told me about this sooner. We could have avoided some complications." "Complications?" Trisha asked, looking suddenly wary. I headed toward the door. "I'll see you all at the memorial service tomorrow. I think I'll stay at a hotel tonight, after all." "Julia!" Diane called after me, her voice holding a note of uncertainty for the first time. "What complications?" I paused at the doorway, allowing myself one small moment of satisfaction. "I guess we'll talk about it after we say goodbye to Grandma properly. This isn't the time." As I drove away from the house where I'd spent so many happy hours with Grandma Rose, the hurt gradually gave way to a simmering determination. My cousins had underestimated me, just as they always had. They saw me as the quiet, emotional one, the sentimental granddaughter who wouldn't know how to protect herself. They had no idea what Grandma and I had done together in those final years. No idea at all. The memorial service for Rose Abigail Silverman was exactly as she would have wanted it, filled with stories, a few tears, but mostly laughter and love. I'd helped plan it with my dad, Grandma's only son, before he had to return to Arizona for a medical procedure. My mother had passed years ago, so it was especially important to me to honor Grandma Rose properly. She had been my anchor, my champion, my teacher. Standing at the podium, I shared stories of our baking adventures, how she taught me that a pinch of salt brought out the sweetness in any dessert. "Just like a little hardship makes the good times sweeter, Julia," she'd say with a wink. From my seat afterward, I watched my cousins whispering to each other, occasionally glancing my way. They were waiting for me to elaborate on the complications I'd mentioned. I let them wait. After the service, family and friends gathered at Grandma's house for a reception. I had brought a selection of desserts from my bakery, all made from her recipes. The rugula, lemon bars, and honey cake disappeared quickly, with many guests commenting on how they tasted exactly like Rose's baking. "You really captured her magic touch," Mrs. Goldstein, Grandma's oldest friend, told me as she took a second piece of honey cake. Rose would be so proud of how you're carrying on her legacy." I saw Mark's head snap up at that comment, his eyes narrowing as he watched people crowd around my dessert table. Eventually, as the guests began to leave, my cousins cornered me in the kitchen. "Okay, Julia," Diane said, arms crossed. "The service is over. What were these complications you mentioned?" I took my time, carefully wrapping the few remaining desserts. "I've been trying to decide the best way to tell you this," I said. "I really did wish you'd included me in your cookbook discussions." "Just spit it out," Mark demanded. "Fine." I straightened up and faced them. "Grandma Rose's recipes can't be published by you, at least not legally, because they're already protected. We registered them as intellectual property 3 years ago when I opened Sweet Rose Bakery." Their expressions would have been comical under different circumstances. 3 identically dropped jaws. "That's ridiculous," Diane finally sputtered. You can't trademark family recipes." "Actually, you can protect certain aspects of them," I corrected her, "especially when they're used commercially, as I've been doing at my bakery with Grandma's full knowledge and participation. We filed all the proper paperwork. Grandma was quite insistent about it, actually." "I don't believe you," Mark said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and turned it to show them. "Here's the confirmation from the trademark office, and here's the signed agreement between Grandma Rose and myself, giving me exclusive rights to commercialize her recipes." I scrolled through the documents. She was of completely sound mind when we did this. Her doctor and lawyer can attest to that. This is unbelievable," Trisha whispered, the color draining from her face. "You went behind our backs." The irony of her accusation wasn't lost on me. I didn't go behind anyone's backs. Grandma and I made this arrangement when I started my business. She was proud to have her recipes featured there and wanted to make sure they were protected. It wasn't a secret. You all just never asked or showed interest in what I was doing with the bakery. "So what are you saying?" Mark demanded. "That we can't publish our own grandmother's recipes? Recipes that have been in our family for generations." "You can publish them for personal use as a family memento," I clarified. "But you cannot commercially publish or sell them without my agreement, as I hold the rights now." I paused. Rights that Grandma explicitly wanted me to have. Diane's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You always were her favorite, always thinking you were special." I'd spent a lifetime being hurt by comments like that, but now I just felt tired. It wasn't about being a favorite, Diane. It was about being present. I showed up. I learned from her. I valued what she had to teach while she was still here to teach it. "This won't stand," Mark declared. "We'll fight this legally." "You're welcome to try," I said calmly. "But I have signed documents, witnesses, and 3 years of established commercial use." Grandma made her wishes very clear. Trisha, always more perceptive than the others, was studying my face. "You're not just going to block us, are you? You have something else in mind." I nodded, relieved that at least one of them was willing to look beyond their immediate anger. "I do have a proposal, one that I think would actually honor Grandma's legacy properly." "Let's hear it then," Diane said tersely. "The cookbook is a good idea," I acknowledged, "but it should be done right, with the proper recipes, the actual methods Grandma used, not just what's written on those cards, which are often incomplete, and with stories about her, photos of her, the history behind each dish. And you'd be in charge, I suppose?" Mark scoffed. "I'd contribute the recipes and my knowledge of her techniques," I said, "but we could work together on the rest. Split the proceeds 4 ways. Make it a true family project that honors her properly. Or," Diane asked, hearing the unspoken alternative, "or I refuse to license the recipes for commercial publication, and we end up in an ugly legal battle that would break Grandma's heart," I said softly. "Is that really how we want to honor her memory?" The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of Grandma's old clock on the wall, the one she'd check constantly while waiting for her pastries to finish baking. "I need to see these documents," Mark finally said. "I want our lawyer to review them." "Of course," I agreed. "I've got nothing to hide." "You really spent all those hours in this kitchen legally plotting against us?" Diane asked, her tone accusing. I shook my head, feeling a profound sadness. "No, Diane. I spent all those hours in this kitchen learning from an amazing woman who wanted to pass down her life's work to someone who cared. The legal protection was her idea. She was a lot savvier than any of you gave her credit for. She knew exactly what might happen to her recipes after she was gone." The truth of that statement hung in the air. Grandma Rose had known her grandchildren well, both their strengths and their flaws. Tricia was the first to soften. "I'd like to see your version of the cookbook idea. No commitment, just what you have in mind." I nodded. I can put something together." "This isn't over," Diane warned as she stalked out of the kitchen. Mark followed her, but Tricia lingered. "You really do make her honey cake exactly like she did," she admitted quietly. "I've never been able to get it right." "It's all in the timing," I told her. And she added a special ingredient that isn't on the recipe card. "Of course she did," Tricia said with a small, sad smile. She always said cooking was about love, not just following instructions. "It is," I agreed. "And that's what I want people to understand from her cookbook. Not just what to make, but how she put her heart into everything she baked." After Tricia left, I stood alone in Grandma's kitchen, trailing my fingers along the countertop worn smooth by decades of use. I could almost feel her presence, hear her voice. "Stand your ground, sweetheart. But remember, the best recipes bring people together. They don't drive them apart." I didn't know if my cousins and I would ever truly come together on this project. There was too much history, too many hurts on all sides. But I did know one thing for certain. Grandma Rose's legacy wouldn't be reduced to a hastily published cookbook designed to make a quick profit. She deserved better than that. And somehow, I would make sure she got it. That night, back in my apartment above Sweet Rose Bakery, I pulled out the special recipe journal Grandma had given me, the real one, not the box of cards my cousins had been poring over. This leather-bound book contained the true recipes, complete with all her secrets, modifications, and stories. The first page bore her handwriting, shakier in her later years, but still distinctly hers. To my Julia, the keeper of my kitchen memories, may these recipes bring you the joy they've brought me, and may they continue to feed both bodies and souls for generations to come. All my love, Grandma Rose. I ran my fingers over her words, feeling the indentations her pen had made in the paper. Tomorrow would bring more confrontations, more difficult conversations. But tonight I would honor her the best way I knew how, by baking her favorite orange almond cookies, filling my little bakery with the scent of her love. As I gathered the ingredients, I thought about the document folder sitting in my desk drawer, the one with all the trademark paperwork, the licensing agreements, the legal protections we'd put in place. Practical Grandma Rose, preparing for every contingency, even as she taught me how to tell when a dough had been kneaded, just enough by its feel beneath my fingers. "You always said the proof is in the pudding, Grandma," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "I guess we're about to find out." The next morning, I arrived at Sweet Rose Bakery 2 hours before opening, as was my routine. The familiar rhythm of baking had always brought me comfort, especially in difficult times. Today, I needed that comfort more than ever. As I mixed the dough for Grandma's famous cinnamon rolls, our Tuesday special, my phone buzzed with a text from Tricia. Mark contacted a lawyer. "Diane is furious. I'm just confused. Can we talk?" I sighed, dusting flour from my hands before replying. "Come by the bakery at 2. We'll be slow then." By the time Tricia pushed open the door, sending the little bell above it tinkling, I'd served the lunch crowd and was wiping down the glass display cases. Only Mrs. Finch remained, savoring her daily Earl Grey tea and lemon bar in the corner. "It smells just like Grandma's kitchen in here," Tricia said, inhaling deeply as she approached the counter. She looked tired, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "That's the highest compliment you could give me," I replied, genuinely touched. "Coffee?" She nodded, settling onto one of the stools at the counter, while I poured her a cup and added a splash of cream, the way I remembered she took it at family gatherings. "You remember how I take my coffee," she said, sounding surprised. "I pay attention to details," I said simply. "It's what makes a good baker." Tricia wrapped her hands around the mug. And a good granddaughter, apparently. She took a sip, then looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell us about the trademark agreement with Grandma?" I leaned against the counter. "Honestly, it never came up. You all were so busy with your own lives. When was the last time any of you asked about my bakery? Really asked, I mean." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I guess we haven't." "It's okay," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. We all had different relationships with Grandma, different priorities. "Mark's lawyer says we might have a case," Tricia said, staring into her coffee. "Something about family intellectual property and prior use." I nodded. "He can certainly try that angle." But Grandma and I were careful. She wanted to make sure everything was legally sound. "That doesn't sound like the Grandma I knew," Tricia frowned. "All that legal stuff." "Maybe you didn't know all of her," I suggested gently. "She was practical, smart, forward-thinking. Remember how she invested in those tech stocks everyone thought were ridiculous 20 years ago? Paid for all our college funds with the returns." A smile tugged at Tricia's lips. "I forgot about that. Dad was so mad that she wouldn't take his sensible investment advice." "Exactly. Grandma knew what she was doing with her recipes, too," I said. "She saw how I used them in the bakery, how customers responded to them. She wanted to protect that legacy." Tricia's eyes scanned the bakery, the vintage baking tools displayed on the walls, the framed black and white photo of Grandma Rose in her kitchen, the menu written in chalk that featured items named after family members. Rose's rugula, Uncle David's favorite sourdough. "You really have built something special here," she admitted. "I can see why Grandma trusted you with her recipes." I pulled out a plate and placed a fresh cinnamon roll on it. "Try this." Tricia took a bite and closed her eyes. "Oh my God," she murmured. "It's exactly like hers. How do you do that?" "She taught me," I said simply. "Not just the ingredients, but the feeling. How the dough should feel under your hands. When to take it out of the oven, not by time but by smell. Things you can't write down on a recipe card." As Tricia ate, I explained my vision for the cookbook. Not just a collection of recipes, but a memoir of Grandma Rose told through her food. Stories of how she developed each recipe. Photos of her throughout the years. Family memories associated with special dishes. "The recipes in that box your mom found, they're incomplete," I told her. "Grandma did that on purpose. She said a good cook always keeps a secret or two." Tricia laughed. "That sounds like her." She hesitated, then asked, "So if we did work together on this cookbook, what would that look like?" For the next hour, I outlined my ideas, showing her the draft proposal I'd been working on since Grandma's diagnosis had made it clear we wouldn't have her forever. Tricia asked thoughtful questions, made suggestions, and even offered to handle the photography. She'd always had a good eye. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. A tentative bridge across years of family distance. "I'll talk to Mom and Mark," she promised at the door. "I can't guarantee anything, but I think this could be beautiful." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for listening." After she left, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. One cousin might be coming around, but the other two would be harder to convince. I was right. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from Mark's lawyer, challenging the trademark protections and demanding all documentation related to Grandma Rose's alleged agreement. The tone was cold, threatening, accusing me of manipulating an elderly woman for personal gain. Reading it in my small apartment above the bakery, I felt the hurt transform into something harder, more resolved. If this was how they wanted to play it, I was prepared. Grandma had made sure of that. I called my own lawyer, forwarded the letter, and then did what I always did when upset I baked. 3 hours later, with the bakery cases filled for the next morning and my freezer stocked with extras, I finally sat down at my kitchen table and allowed myself to cry. The soft knock at my door was so unexpected that I nearly didn't answer. When I did, I found my Uncle David, my father's brother and Diane's father, standing there, looking uncomfortable in a way that reminded me powerfully of Grandma Rose when she'd had something difficult to say. "Uncle David," I said, surprised, "is everything okay?" "No," he said bluntly. "My daughter and nephew are being stubborn fools, and I told them so. May I come in?" I stepped aside, hastily wiping at my eyes. Uncle David had always been kind but distant, more focused on his accounting practice than family gatherings. Seeing him in my apartment, taking in the vintage kitchen tools displayed on my walls, the recipe books lining my shelves, felt strange. "Rose's honey cake," he said, spotting the remaining slices on my counter. "Mind if I—" "Please," I gestured toward it. "Grandma always said you were the one who appreciated it most." He cut a generous slice, took a bite, and closed his eyes briefly. "Just like hers. I've missed this taste." I poured coffee for both of us and sat across from him at my small table. "I assume you're here about the trademark situation." David nodded, setting down his fork. "I heard all 3 versions from my daughter, my nephew, and now my niece. Thought I should talk to you directly." "I appreciate that." "Did you know your grandmother came to see me about this?" he asked. 3 years ago, when you were opening this place." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "No, she never mentioned it." "Typical Rose," he chuckled. "Always playing her cards, close to the vest. She asked me, as both an accountant and a family member, whether she was doing the right thing legally protecting her recipes for you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her she should do exactly what she wanted with her own intellectual property," he said firmly. "That she'd earned that right, and that you were the only one who'd shown real interest in carrying on her legacy." Tears pricked my eyes again. "Thank you for that." "Don't thank me for stating the obvious," he said gruffly. "Look, Julia, my daughter and Mark are upset because they feel blindsided. They had this whole plan, and suddenly you're standing in their way with legal documents they didn't know existed." "They blindsided me first," I pointed out. "They excluded me completely from their cookbook plan." "I know," he acknowledged, "and that was wrong. But they're reacting out of hurt pride now, not thinking clearly about what Rose would have wanted." He took another bite of cake, chewed thoughtfully. "This lawsuit they're threatening, it would get ugly. Family disputes always do. It would drag on, drain everyone financially and emotionally. Is that what any of us want as Rose's legacy? A family torn apart fighting over her recipes?" "Of course not," I said softly. "That's the last thing Grandma would have wanted." "So what do we do?" he asked. "Because I've tried talking sense into them, and they're not hearing it from me." I thought about Trish's visit to the bakery, the tentative connection we'd rebuilt. I've been working on a proposal, a way we could all be involved in honoring Grandma's legacy properly. "Show me," he said. I pulled out my laptop and opened the draft cookbook proposal I'd been refining. For the next hour, I walked him through it, the stories, the photographs, the proper recipes with all Grandma's secrets included, the family memories behind each dish. By the time I finished, Uncle David was nodding slowly. "This is good, Julia. Really good. This is something Rose would have been proud of. But will Mark and Diane even look at it?" I asked. "They're so angry with me right now." Uncle David's expression turned thoughtful. "Maybe they need to hear from Rose herself." "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother was a woman who planned ahead," he said. Who knows what else she might have left behind besides those trademark documents? Understanding dawned. You think she left a message? It wouldn't surprise me one bit, he replied. Have you gone through all her personal things yet? Her desk? Her safe deposit box? I shook my head. Dad handled most of that, but he had to get back to Arizona for his treatment. The house is still full of her things. We've all been avoiding dealing with it, I think. Then perhaps it's time, Uncle David said, standing up. Would you be willing to meet me there tomorrow? I have a feeling we might find something that could help resolve this situation. The next morning, I met Uncle David at Grandma Rose's house. The place felt different now, quieter, emptier, the life gone from it. We headed straight for her small home office, where her roll-top desk stood against the wall, its surface covered with framed family photos. Rose was always methodical about important documents, Uncle David said as we began carefully going through drawers. If she left something for all of you, it would be properly labeled. An hour into our search, I found it a thick manila envelope with "For my grandchildren. To be opened after my passing," written in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. Inside were 4 smaller envelopes, each bearing one of our names. Should we call the others? I asked, holding the envelopes reverently. Uncle David checked his watch. I took the liberty of asking them to meet us here at noon. That's in about 30 minutes. All of them? I asked, surprised. Even Diane and Mark? I can be persuasive when necessary, he said with a small smile. I told them we found something important of Rose's, and that all 4 grandchildren needed to be present. I didn't specify what it was. When Diane, Mark, and Tricia arrived, Diane and Mark looking defensive, Tricia offering me a tentative smile, Uncle David gathered us in the living room and explained what we'd found. Before we open these, he said, gesturing to the envelopes I'd placed on the coffee table, I want to remind you all of something. Your grandmother loved each of you, in different ways perhaps, but equally. Whatever she's written in these letters, remember that. Mark reached for his envelope first, his lawyer's instincts probably telling him to see what he was dealing with. One by one, we each took our letters and opened them in silence. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages covered in Grandma's handwriting. My dearest Julia, if you're reading this, I've moved on to that great kitchen in the sky. Don't be sad, sweetheart. I've had a wonderful life filled with love and good food. What more could anyone ask for? I know you understand why I wanted to protect my recipes legally for your bakery. They aren't just instructions for making food. They're my life's work, my art, the story of our family told in flour and sugar. You're the only one who truly grasped that, who sat with me in the kitchen, not just to learn techniques, but to hear the stories behind each dish. But I also know my other grandchildren, and I worry that when I'm gone, this situation might cause division. Mark has always seen the world in terms of assets and opportunities. Diane has always felt things deeply, but struggled to express her feelings, except through defensiveness. And sweet Tricia often gets caught in the middle, wanting everyone to get along. What I hope, more than anything, is that my recipes might bring you all together rather than drive you apart. That's why I've left each of you a letter, explaining my wishes and my reasoning. I've entrusted the legal protection of my recipes to you because you've proven yourself as their guardian. You understand that they need to be made with love and precision. But I hope you'll find a way to share that legacy with your cousins too, in whatever way feels right. Perhaps a family cookbook with all of you contributing your memories? Mark has a good head for business. Diane has always had a flair for design, and Tricia's photography could bring the dishes to life. With your baking expertise, it could be something truly special. Whatever you decide, know that I trust your judgment. You have a good heart, Julia, and a steady hand, both essential qualities in a baker and in life. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. The secret ingredient in my honey cake is a tablespoon of strong brewed coffee. Don't tell Mark, he always claimed to hate coffee. even as he devoured that cake every holiday. I looked up from my letter to find my cousins in various states of emotion. Tricia was openly crying, Diane was blinking rapidly, and Mark was staring at his letter with a clenched jaw, his way of holding back feelings. "She knew," Diane said finally, her voice uncharacteristically small. "She knew we might fight over her recipes. And she tried to prevent it," Tricia added, wiping her eyes. Mark folded his letter carefully, precisely, and slipped it back into its envelope. "She wrote that she was proud of you, Julia," he said, not looking at me. "Said you were the only one who took the time to learn her techniques properly. That legally protecting the recipes for your use was her idea, not yours." "It was," I confirmed softly. "I would have been happy just to have her recipes for the bakery. The legal protection was all her suggestion." "She also wrote that she thought we could all work together," Diane said reluctantly. "That a family cookbook was something she'd always wanted to see." I nodded. "She mentioned that to me, too." "And to me," said Tricia. "And me," Mark admitted. We all sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what Grandma Rose had orchestrated from beyond the grave. A reconciliation, a joint project, a way forward. Uncle David, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Well, it seems Rose has made her wishes clear. The question is, what are the four of you going to do about it?" Mark was the first to speak, his business mind already working. "I still think there's a market for these recipes, a significant one." "I agree," I said, surprising him. "And I'm not opposed to a cookbook. I never was. I just wanted it done right, with all her techniques, her stories, her spirit intact." "And you have the legal rights," Diane pointed out, still sounding resentful. "Yes," I acknowledged. "But that doesn't mean I can't license them for a project that honors Grandma properly. A project we all contribute to." "Like what?" Mark asked skeptically. I took a deep breath and pulled my proposal from my bag. "I've been working on this since before Grandma passed. It's a concept for a cookbook that's more than just recipes. It's her story, our family story, told through food." As I laid out my vision, much as I had for Tricia and Uncle David, I could see the resistance gradually melting from Mark and Diane's expressions. The proposal included roles for each of us, my baking expertise and recipe knowledge, Mark's business acumen for publishing and marketing, Diane's design sense for layout, and Tricia's photography. "We could call it Rose's Kitchen, a family legacy," I suggested. "Split the proceeds 4 ways. Make it something that truly honors her. And you'd allow us to use the recipes? Legally." Mark asked, ever the pragmatist. "With an agreement in place, yes," I said. "One that ensures they're presented properly, with all her techniques included." Diane was paging through the proposal, her professional eye assessing the concept. As an interior designer, she had a good sense for aesthetics. "This could be beautiful," she admitted reluctantly. "The seasonal organization, the family stories." "I'd want final approval on the recipes," I said firmly, "to make sure they're accurate. That's non-negotiable." Mark nodded slowly. "And I'd want a solid business plan, marketing strategy, and publishing deal." "Fine," I agreed. "I could start photographing the process," Tricia offered, warming to the idea. "Julia making the recipes in Grandma's kitchen, maybe? For authenticity. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, the 4 of us were building something together instead of competing." The tension in the room had transformed into creative energy. Uncle David smiled, looking at the framed photo of Grandma Rose on the mantel. "I think your grandmother would be very pleased right now." 8 months later, I stood in Sweet Rose Bakery surrounded by friends, family, and customers, holding the first printed copy of Rose's Kitchen, a family legacy. The cookbook had turned out even more beautiful than I'd imagined. With Tricia's stunning photography, Diane's elegant design, and Mark's business savvy securing us a deal with a respected publisher. My cousins moved through the crowd, signing books and sharing stories about Grandma. The tension between us hadn't completely disappeared. Decades of family dynamics don't change overnight, but we'd found a way to work together, to create something meaningful from our shared love for Grandma Rose. "You know," Diane said, coming to stand beside me at the counter, "I really thought you were being selfish when you blocked our original cookbook plan. I didn't understand why Grandma would give you exclusive rights to her recipes. And now?" I asked. She glanced around the bakery, where customers were enjoying samples of Grandma's famous desserts alongside copies of the cookbook. "Now I get it. You weren't keeping her legacy to yourself. You were protecting it until we were all ready to honor it properly." I smiled, thinking of the letter from Grandma that I kept framed above my desk. That's exactly what she wanted. Mark joined us, looking pleased with himself. The publisher just called. First printing is almost sold out. They're ordering a second run immediately. Grandma would have been shocked, I laughed. She always said she was just a home baker. "She was much more than that," Tricia said, slipping her arm through mine. "And now everyone will know it." As the evening wound down and the last customers left with their signed cookbooks, the four of us found ourselves alone in the bakery, surrounded by the lingering scents of Grandma's recipes: cinnamon, vanilla, love. Mark raised his coffee cup. "To Grandma Rose." "To Grandma," we echoed. I looked around at my cousins, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in years. We were different people, with different strengths, bound together by the legacy of a remarkable woman who had found a way to bring us together even after she was gone. "You know," I said, "I think this is just the beginning. Grandma had so many other recipes we didn't include: seasonal specialties, holiday traditions, everyday favorites." "Volume 2. Tricia suggested with a smile. "Maybe," I nodded. "But also, I've been thinking about offering baking classes here, teaching people Grandma's techniques the way she taught me." "That's actually a great idea," Diane said, sounding surprised at her own enthusiasm. "We could tie it in with the cookbook, create a whole experience around Rose's recipes." Mark was already pulling out his phone, making notes. "We could develop a line of branded baking tools, specialty ingredients." I laughed. "Slow down, Mark. One thing at a time." But as we continued brainstorming into the night, I felt Grandma Rose's presence among us, almost as tangible as the scent of her recipes in the air. She had known exactly what she was doing, with her recipes, with her letters, with her grandchildren. In protecting her recipes, she'd given us something far more valuable than a collection of instructions for baking. She'd given us a way back to each other, a shared purpose, a family legacy that was about more than just food. And as I locked up the bakery that night, watching my cousins head off together, still discussing ideas for our next collaboration, I whispered a thank you to the woman who had taught me that the secret ingredient in any recipe and in life was love.